we go.
Alright guys, so in this video we're checking out the Athlon Argos 6-24x50 BTR. This is a first focal plane scope. It's a great value. A lot of people are utilizing this scope even in PRS matches. It's got great tracking, great glass, a really great entry-level scope, or even an experienced shooter can have a lot of fun with one of these scopes and not have to spend a lot of money. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how to get it set up, mounted to your rifle. I'll show you how to zero it with a couple of shots. We'll actually zero it in about 3 shots, and then we'll take it out to range and just see how she does. We'll validate it out at range and make sure everything's working right. So stick around. Before I forget, I will put time hacks down on the bottom in the description, so if you're looking for specifically the zero or the mounting or something like that, you can find that in there and just skip ahead and you have to listen to my whole daggone video. Let's get into it. All right, now if you're going to mount this on your rifle, a couple things that you're going to want to do when you're setting up your rifle for long range shooting. You're going to want a good scope base to start. This is a Remington 700 and it's chambered in 308. And what I have here is a Weaver Tactical scope base. This is actually a 20 MOA scope base, and what that does is that cants the scope at a downward angle about 20 minutes, and what that allows us to do is it actually helps bring the rifle up, and it brings the arc of the rifle a little bit higher. But what we want to do is, again, you want a good scope base, and if you're not really taking it out to distance, you don't feel you need the 20 MOA, then don't worry about that. The next thing you're going to want is proper rings. Now this is a 30 millimeter tube, so you want 30 millimeter rings. If you're mounting this on a Remington 700, try to stay away from the really high scope ring or scope rings. You don't want this too high. You want to try to get the scope as close to the bore axis as you can. It helps with you're setting up your cheek weld. I would recommend, if you don't have one, you can get a Wheeler fat wrench. These are about 30 bucks. If you have firearms, you have optics, it's good to have in your inventory. When I go to mount the scope, the first thing I want to do is I want to just kind of eyeball it. I will go ahead and I'll set the rings on the scope base, and we'll just eyeball where this guy is going to line up. All right. And what I'm looking for is I want as even of a distribution of distance between where the rings are seated. You can have them choked up. It's probably not going to hurt anything, but I typically just try to line it up about dead center. The other thing you want to pay attention to is make sure that your adjustment ring is not making contact with the scope base, and then your objective bell is not making any contact with the scope base or the barrel itself. If any of those things are touching, you're going to want to raise the scope up, so unfortunately you're going to need higher rings to do that. The other thing you're going to want to check is you're going to lift the bolt and make sure the bolt is going to clear the ocular bell. If it makes contact there, again, you're going to want to raise that. If it clears it, you're good to go. Before we bolt this thing down, we get her all locked up, use the scope, its natural shape and alignment, and we want to match that with the ring. So we'll keep that nice and loose, as I mentioned, and we'll set that right on there. And the scope will naturally orient the rings before we put any tension down. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and move my scope rings forward until they make contact with that forward lug. So the reason why we want to make contact with that forward lug is when this rifle recoils, all the weight of the scope is going to move forward. Once you got it forward, then you reach around and you go ahead and hand tighten that down. Next thing we're going to do is same thing, we'll bring the back ring forward. Now we can go ahead and we'll put top of our rings on. And we're just going to slightly tighten these down. We don't want a lot of tension because we still have to set up our eye relief, and then we also want to adjust our cant of our scope. We don't have our scope rings locked into the base just yet either. Now, when you're torquing these down, it's best that you go in a crisscross pattern. If you've ever noticed, if the scope is not mounted correctly, sometimes it can put a tension on the scope, and it's actually twisting the scope one way or the other, and your magnification ring will get real tight, or your side parallax sometimes will get tight. And then if it's doing that, you notice that what you might do is just loosen the tension on your rings. I would start with the base first, loosen those up, see if that relieves the tension, and then tighten it back down. And we want just enough tension that it holds it in place, so when I move it, it stays where I want it. Now that I got that in place, it's somewhat torqued down, I can go ahead and I will lock my scope rings in place. All right, once I get my scope rings set up and tightened down, I'll double check and make sure I don't have any undue tension. Double check my objective bell is not making contact with the barrel. Magnification ring is not making contact with the scope base, and I can still clear everything with my bolt. All right, now that it's somewhat on here, what we want to do is we want to set up our eye relief and then get our cant set up. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you want to make sure that you get into a good prone firing position and try to get the rifle nice and stable. When you do this outside, instead of looking at something very close range, you're looking at something down range, and you're going to get in the right position as if you were going to actually make a shot. Since the rings are still loose, all you have to do is slide the scope forward or backwards until you get the proper eye relief. When you're trying to set up your eye relief, make sure you don't see any black shadowing or anything like that. You want to see a full ocular bell, and you need to be in a good, comfortable position. Now you need to go ahead and adjust your cant, and in order to do that, you really should utilize a bubble level. If you don't have a bubble level, people use a lot of different methods with hanging a string off a wall and looking at something that's a very vertical structure. But really the best way to do it is just take a bubble level and utilize that to square your reticle to your rifle. Once that's all done, then you'll go ahead and take your wheel or fat wrench or your torque wrench. This is an inch-pound torque wrench. And you'll go ahead and torque all your rings down to the manufacturer's specifications on your rings. Once that's done, you're ready to go. You can get out to the range and zero your rifle. Now, if you don't have a laser boresight, all you got to do is remove the bolt. And if this is an AR, simply just remove the upper receiver and the bolt carrier group. And all we're going to do is drop our magnification ring to its lowest power, and then we'll just look down the bore and align the bore with our target, and then check to see if our crosshairs are there. Looks like we're pretty close. Should be pretty close there. And once I get it adjusted, I should be almost dead on. So we'll see how it plays out here. Now that I've got a rough zero in place, windage looks good, elevation looks good, looking through the bore, I'm gonna check my parallax, make sure I'm set. As I move my head up and down, left to right, I got that reticle. It's gonna stay glued to the target, so it's not gonna move around. If it moves and weaves and bobs around, you need to adjust your side parallax until it stops doing that. And a little trick is sometimes I'll just lift my head and body off the rifle, and that way I'm not moving it. Okay, all right, so it looks good. We're in business, so we'll go ahead and do our first rough shot. And I think what I'll do is we'll go ahead and make the shot. I'll observe the shot, and then we'll make our first adjustment off that if we need to. All right, let's take us back up to 10 power. Now the nice thing about this scope, I took that shot so I can zoom in and I can observe the target to see where I'm at. Okay, it took me a minute to find it, but it's sitting on the top left corner of the V of the reverse target logo. So this is graduated
This scope is graduated the same. My turret is the same as my mill reticle, and this is first focal plane. All I need to do is just use my reticle, measure my elevation and my windage, and make my adjustments, and then fire another shot and see if we're in the kill zone. So, all right. So elevation wise, I'm gonna say we're about let's say 1.2 high. So really close to where I had it. So I'm gonna bring this stack down to 0, and we'll just leave it. We'll bring it down a mil. That's probably pretty close. Let me double check here. Yeah, we'll come down 2/10. Now, as far as windage, we're left of the target. I'm going to say about 0.6. So I'm going to bring it right 0.6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. As long as I got that aligned right, we should be in the target zone. So let's go ahead and load up. Another shot. All right. Bring my magnification back down. Yeah, right in the bullseye. Yeah, that's really good. So that's one of the nice things about a first focal point scope. That's essentially a 0 in 2 shots. So let's go ahead and confirm that. So we'll go ahead and fire another shot. Yeah, as far as I could tell, I'm threading right through the middle. And I'm pretty comfortable with that. I got an 8.5 or an 8 by 12 inch plate out there. What I'm going to do is go ahead and range it. First, I got to find it. Looks like that's about exactly 1 mil. 12 times 27.7 and divide that by 1. It says 332 yards. Okay. So .9. Okay. 1.9 hold. I'm say is 0.3. So I'm going to use the reticle to hold my windage here. That's a hit. Dead center windage. Looks like I'm about 3/10 of a mil low, which is fine. Aiming dead center of that plate. Yep, another successful